Ladies and gentlemen, our final session is called a Fireside Chat. Security is so tough here, no fire. We tried hard, but we weren't allowed any fire. So you're very much fire protected until Jonathan starts to shoot now. Well, it is a great pleasure that I can introduce Jonathan Askin for many reasons. And the first challenge is actually, how do I do that in a short time? Jonathan is a professor at Brooklyn Law School with long-standing experience in law and technology. He is furthermore the founder of the Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic, something we need to explore a bit more so that we all understand what that means. He is called the godfather of legal hackers. That's also something we need to explore a bit more. He is a visiting professor at the Queen Mary University in London, right? A visiting professor, right? Visiting adjunct professor at Columbia Law School. He had been at MIT's Media Lab and many more academic responsibilities. I would like to move on that he is also qualified as an attorney. So he holds licenses in 2 jurisdictions in the US. He has practiced as an attorney both in private practice and in government. And he's, of course, a teacher. He writes, and he's very innovative. So I will put the curriculum and the biography up on the website. You need to read it. It takes, however, a long time to cover all the functions. So, Jonathan, thank you for making the way. And I know it was a challenge because you already started the teaching season, which isn't the case here. But when I got first in contact with you, I was immediately drawn to your signature line, which says, "Yours in common, uncommon mission." Jonathan, so what's your mission?
So you should know, I used that signature line sparingly. I used it with you because I thought our mission had a fair amount of overlap, and as much overlap as there was, our common mission seemed somewhat uncommon. If I were to think about what my mission were specifically for this audience and where I am today, it's primarily to ensure that there is a role for the next generation of lawyer in the digital revolution. The big problem we've experienced for hundreds of years at this point is the perception that lawyers have been the preservers of the status quo. And we are going through a revolution more profound than anything we've ever seen, I think, in the history of humanity. And if you think about every single revolution that society has undergone, whether or not you think of lawyers as preservers of the status quo, it's been the lawyers, at least those trained in legal reasoning, who have been forced to step in and reorder society during and after the revolution. Now we're going through a revolution that is so technologically sophisticated and so fundamental to the nature of global society and so disruptive of everything we've thought about with regard to the nature of political structures and social structures. It is incumbent upon us, those of us in this room, those of us who are lawyers, those of us who are technologists, those of us who are academics, to ensure that we train this next generation of lawyers to play that essential role. Because if we don't have those trained in legal reasoning, it's going to be a runaway train. We are the only ones who are, I think, empowered and trained effectively to figure out how to reposition society in a post-digital world. So that's what we need to do, and that's the scary part for lawyers. I can go on with... And the truth of the matter is, when I say lawyer to even folks in this room, and many of you are probably revolutionary lawyers, who thinks of the lawyer as a revolutionary force? Who thinks of the lawyer as the conservative preserver of the status quo? Right. Who thinks of academics as revolutionary forces? Yeah? Who generally, a couple academics think so, who thinks of academia as sort of the bastion of preserving status quo in society by and large? So when you combine law and academia, you get sort of the most conservative of the conservative. I think as revolutionary as a lawyer might want to be, within the academy, we still are, I think, pretty cautious and pretty careful. And we joined the academy in part because we like the stability of it. So rocking the boat is still sort of anathema to what we are as attorneys and what we are as academics. So it's my hope that we can, and part of the reason we started something like Legal Hackers was to imbue in the young lawyer the spirit, the ethos of the hacker.
Is that criminal?
So, and this was a terrifying moment. I got to tell you, when I started teaching about 13 years ago, and for the first 4 or 5 years, I had a conservative dean, a relatively conservative administration, a cautious faculty who had known what they do, how they do it. I had proposed, and students and I would go out every weekend to a hackathon 13 years ago, and none of my colleagues knew what the hell we were talking about. And when we said the word hackathon, they thought we were doing something nefarious. So, and the students and I felt like wallflowers at this great digital revolution. And what would we do? We'd go to the hackathon, and we'd sit on the sidelines while coders and developers and young entrepreneurs and designers were doing amazing things. And we'd sit there for about 46 hours in awe of what they were doing. And then at the 46th hour, people would demo what they've been doing. And then it would be the job of me and my students to dissect what they were doing and put it in a legal context and say, you didn't divide up your IP, you didn't figure out your IP, you didn't figure out how to divide up your equity, you didn't figure out an appropriate corporate structure, you forgot about all of these regulations and ethical implications of what you're trying to do. And we were essentially the wet blanket on the fire of innovation. And I thought, that is not what at least I want to be training my lawyers to become. So we tried for a couple of years to bring the hacker community to us, to run legal hackathons where, what are lawyers good at? We are essentially smart lay people, if I could be so kind to us to say we're smart. I think mostly we are. We're smart people who could be fantastic project managers and know how to translate different silos of information and synthesize it, taking large amounts of information and synthesizing it. Well, isn't that a great role for a project manager at a hackathon? So we thought, can we do a legal hackathon where we determine the rules of the road, the projects we want to handle, and bring the developers and coders and designers to us? And for a couple of years, my deans and faculty said, no. Hacking's a dirty word. We don't want it here. Then I got lucky. Our dean left. So we had this one beautiful moment where there was no one in charge. It was like, do you know Charlie Brown, the Peanuts? There was this one moment where the kids were running the show. And we decided we're going to do a hackathon. And no one was there to stop us. So we ran, back in 2012, what I believe was the first legal hackathon in the world, and brought in the coders. And it was sort of a hackathon on training wheels. It was really more like a talkathon. We were talking about policy and how we could crowdsource and collaborate to rewrite the laws for the digital age. But it was fun, but it was still mostly lawyers in the room with a few technologists weighing in. It wasn't a bona fide hackathon. From that first hackathon, though, we built the first chapter of Legal Hackers in New York City. Then I went to teach at MIT in part because I needed technology partners. I have a mixed blessing. I come from a standalone law school. So my goal is to make sure we can collaborate with as many technologists as possible. So why not go to one of the world's preeminent technology universities without a law school of its own? So they became our tech advisor, we became their legal advisor, and it was a mutually beneficial relationship. And they sort of took it to the next level. They gave us the tools to actually turn legal hacking into bona fide hacking. And then from there, it grew into this global community where we are now able, across 160 plus chapters, to at least start to collaborate. When we did those first hackathons, we were everyone was reinventing the wheel in their own little silos. And the goal, I thought, was to make it reiterative. What we were doing in Brooklyn should inform what was going on in Vienna, and what was going on in Vienna should inform what was going on in London. How could we create this network where we were all building on the shoulders of giants and weren't reinventing everything in our own silos? So that's sort of the universe that I came from and where I hope we're going.
And we have a chapter in Vienna with
yes.
360 members, so it's not that small. Just before leaving the legal hackers environment, because you have been at MIT, hackers ethics, could you lose a word of what hackers ethics means so that the audience understands why it's proper?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's proper because it's there's been this backlash now in the role of technology. We used to think it's attributed to Mark Zuckerberg. Move fast and break things was sort of the spirit of the hacker. And from that, move fast and break things, good things would happen. And that was really antithetical to what we were trained to do as lawyers. Lawyers are very precise, very cautious. We don't say things until we know we're right. We say, you cross every T, you dot every I. But that is way too slow in the world of the startup. The startup will move, break things, and sort out the details later, ask for forgiveness later, et cetera, et cetera. Now, is that going to be the rules of the road going forward now in the wake of Facebook and Google transgressions? I don't know. But to the extent that there is someone anywhere in the world moving fast, they need agile legal support, at least as much as anyone else. So my attitude is, if it's a great idea, and it should exist, but for the fact that the law says it can't exist, who's wrong? Is the great idea wrong, or is the law wrong? My conception is the law's probably wrong. If this is an idea that is publicly, socially beneficial, then we've got to move the law in a more beneficial direction to enable these sorts of positive social
There are
changes.
ways to change the law, right? So,
Yeah, so what Legal Hackers does is twofold. There are two sort of spokes to Legal Hackers. One is to use legal technology to improve the law and legal process, and the other is to morph the law to better suit the needs of an evolved society. And if we can bridge those two. In fact, I'm sort of a fraud when it comes to legal technology, to be candid. I started out I was a civil rights lawyer and a civil liberties lawyer, and I was bored to death. And I was trying to figure out why I was bored to death pursuing what it should be a pretty noble mission for a young lawyer. And it turns out I was bored to death because I think all of the important issues, at least in civil rights and civil liberties in America, were waged and fought in the 60s and 70s. All of the great intellectual architects were my predecessors. And everything I was doing was sort of rehashing their ideas, retrenchment. So I quit the law. And then something amazing happened. The internet happened. And I thought, oh my God, you know what? It is not civil rights and civil liberties. That's the great issue of the day for lawyers. It's the internet. And how do we play a role? So I ran to the Federal Communications Commission and ran to government to help try to write the rules of the road to govern this new technology in a global world. And I thought, oh my God, I am going to be able to spend the next 50 years of my career trying to figure out the rules of the road for this. And I should be so lucky that I could get to train new generation after new generation in the rules of the road so that they can create the new rules for the next 50, 60, 70 years.
but moving on from there, because that's somehow related, Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic.
Yeah.
What's about that? Very fascinating.
So if you remember 2007, I don't know what it was like here. 2007 was when I started teaching. I was teaching technology law and telecom law. And Brooklyn Law School, like every other law school in America, thought it wanted to have an IP clinic. And to us in 2007, IP meant what? It meant intellectual property. And I thought that sounded pretty narrow. I'm going to create an IP clinic, but IP is going to be much more than intellectual property. Intellectual property is one thing that means something to society, but so does information policy, so does internet protocol, so does innovative practice. So I made up two IPs. I made up the term the Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic, because I've been a lot of things in my career. It's been, some would say I'm a dilettante. Some would say I'm a dilettante. But I think it made me uniquely situated to recognize that if you're going to be a lawyer in the digital age, you need to be agile and understand the full spectrum of needs that will confront digital economy, ventures, and society. So I've been a policymaker, I've been a general counsel, I've been a litigator, I've been a corporate lawyer. My thinking is that the lawyer coming out of law school now needs to understand at least the full nature of the issues that will confront these clients. So what does that mean? That means if you're an operations person, if you're doing transactional law, you also need to know how it's going to affect litigation prospects. You also need to know how politics and policy is going to affect that venture and how you bridge all of that. So I decided we are going to train our law students to at least have some rudimentary understanding of the full spectrum of legal needs. They need, so incubating. We are incubating new ventures, both traditional ventures and also legal ventures. And we are also doing policy reform. So I think it was the first clinic of its kind that was sort of a full-service clinic for startup ventures in which we not just did their transaction work, not just did their litigation, not just did their policy advocacy, but we did it all. And I think it was an ambitious
advisory
task.
work, or is it so you advise the startups in their?
We are empowered by the Supreme Court of New York to represent clients as fully as any law firm is allowed to represent clients under my supervision. So as long as there is faculty supervising them, students are allowed to be full-service lawyers. So we'll do all of their legal work up until the point where it may be too sophisticated and we have to bring in some outside counsel to help us or some faculty colleagues to help us. Or our clients graduate just like our students graduate. Our clients, when they do their first funding round, we pass them along to the law firms. Ideally, they're law firms to which some of our graduates belong. But there's this virtuous cycle, I think, between the graduation of the law students and the graduation of the ventures themselves.
So I think it's a very great thing that you have this broad experience, right? That to some extent, I don't know, but if I read it correctly, brought you to Europe with the clinic concept as well?
Yeah, so this is sort of embarrassing for me, and it's I think a real homage to what was going on in Europe. I chaired Barack Obama's Internet Governance Working Group for the 2008 campaign, for his campaign. So my connections were really good with the new Obama administration. I had thought about going to work for the White House at one point. I decided I got to stay in academia for now. But I did ask for one. The Obama administration launched something called the Startup America Partnership around 2009. And this was an effort to support the startup ecosystem all over America, not just in the large cities, but in the second-tier cities. And the Obama administration, my friends, were very slow to move. So I said, all right, I'm going to ask Europe. Now, in 2009, what was going on in Europe? Austerity. Europe was not giving out money to much of anything, I thought. But they liked the idea of using law schools in Europe the way we were using Brooklyn Law School to help the burgeoning startups throughout regions in Europe. So we cobbled together we got some money from the EU, about 500,000 euros from the EU, to build out a network built on the Brooklyn Law Incubator and Policy Clinic model with 5 core partners and ultimately 28 law schools around Europe, all of which were designed to help the burgeoning startup communities within their regions. So I thought America failed in the mission to do this, and Europe sort of leapfrogged over America in its efforts to do that. And for me, it was a wonderful experience.
Give us a couple of examples. Where are those clinics in Europe?
So the 5 core partners were the University of Amsterdam, the KU Leuven, Queen Mary, where I got the visiting professor of Queen Mary because of this, Center for Commercial Law Studies, and the Hans Bredow Institute in the University of Hamburg and the Humboldt Institute in Berlin. So those were the 5 core, but the network grew from those 5. They did some additional outreach.
And it's still there? So
it still exists. It doesn't have any EU funding, but the core members have some hard money from the universities, all of which have been working. And a lot of them are anchors in the legal hacker community within their respective regions as well.
So moving back a bit more into the legal tech environment, where do you see sort of the disruptive technologies at the moment? So what will be disruptive, let's say, for the next 2 or 3 years? Yeah,
well, I heard most of it on the panels before, in the discussions before. I completely agree. A lot of it is just, semantics. If I would say the 3 biggest technological issues that lawyers are going to need to confront right now are artificial intelligence, blockchain and distributed ledger technology, and general legal automation. Some easier than others. We are using the term artificial intelligence to cover everything and its brother. We're using it to mean almost everything when, in fact, at this point, all we're really doing in the legal landscape is rudimentary machine learning systems and semantic systems and parsing through unstructured data and trying to make sense out of it. That's essentially, in e-discovery context, was, I think, that someone also derided the overuse of the term AI when it's really just being used for e-discovery purposes. So, but having said that, and we talked about what will the role of the lawyer be in an AI-enabled world. And I'm glad someone said, I think it was Professor from London. Where is he? There you are. I think you said that lawyers will be replacing technologists. And here's so my interpretation of that is, what I think in the world of artificial intelligence is that there is no doubt that artificial intelligence will do a lot of the rudimentary tasks that lawyers shouldn't have been doing in the first place. When I started out at a law firm, and I was scared to death to do the routine tasks. Those routine tasks, like setting up a corporation, these are tasks that a paralegal could have done, an administrative assistant could have done, and now certainly a computer can do, better than I can do. So I hated the fact that I graduated from law school with what is supposed to be sophisticated knowledge, a very precise, something special, and I was doing these routine tasks. We are now free to do that which the automation cannot do. So I look at it like this. There's no doubt that AI will disrupt every single service sector over the next 5, 10, 50 years. But the last service that will be disrupted after medicine, after accounting, after engineering, is going to be law. And why do I say that? I say that because as long as we know how to train our lawyers to do, what we have to do is figure out how AI-assisted law is going to work, what the AI will never be able to do well, and what the role of the lawyer is in an AI-enabled world. So I think it transforms the situation. AI is great at separating ones and zeros, black and white. Lawyers are great at playing in the gray. Isn't that great? AI hates the gray. It wants certitude. Lawyers love ambiguity. That's where their special skills come in. So I think there's sort of a change in the roles of a lawyer in the modern society. It's more lawyer as philosopher and ethicist. We were talking about the ethical. There was a question about what happens in an automated world, autonomous vehicles, et cetera. Who's coming up with the ethical overlay on that? I think the AI will come up with some rules, and lawyers will be the benchmark, will be the watchdog, making sure that the AI is adhering to social structures and what we think in an evolving society what ethics means.
But you can turn it around as well. The AI might, unfold certain unethical practices in very procedures because it may, there's measurable sort of computation, for example, in predictive analytics or whatever. Yeah?
So I'm sorry.
It's the other way around. So the
AI will be the AI will be the guarantor.
AI might be a controlling tool for ethics for people who don't play to the rules.
Yeah. So there's good and
using the gray, right?
Right. Yeah. Oh, so getting more precision in, say, a legal proceeding is very important. And if the facts are better elucidated by AI, that should be a good thing. We should all know what the facts are. And everyone should have equal access to those facts. So there's going to be this new sort of digital divide in legal justice, in justice systems, where right now we have a monumental disparity between those who can afford great counsel and those who can either afford no counsel or poor counsel. Yep. Will AI be a great equalizer there? There's going to be a time being when only the rich can afford the AI. But there's also probably going to be a time, at least if we work towards it, where everyone's going to have equal access to the facts. There's a TV show called Goliath. It's in its 3rd season now. It got terrible, but the 1st season was fantastic. And this was Billy Bob Thornton played a down-and-out former great litigator who's now taking on the largest law firm in Los Angeles, his former law firm. And they bury him in about 10 million pages of documents, knowing that he is never going to be able to compete on a level playing field with a large law firm. AI would relieve that disparity, affordable AI, so that we can actually argue on the facts. Now, so in a judicial context, is it going to be good? I don't think maybe someone does think that we'd be better off with only AI justice, AI juries, AI judges, but I'd like to think that there will be some combination of AI as fact finder and lawyer and judge as synthesizer of the facts to come up with a meaningful conception of justice. Because justice is going to evolve over time. Can the AI keep up with evolving norms the way a human with emotional intelligence could? I think the question is, can we train lawyers to have this emotional intelligence or not?
Well, I think, if Robert Kowalski is right, then the lawyer becomes the new sort of coder. The question is, what do you change in your education to your students? Because technically, I cannot see it in the current sort of environment of educating people that they easily step in such roles. So something needs to change there.
So I've been wrong about this before. I'll be wrong about it again. My mind keeps changing on this conclusion. I do think it's important for students to learn at least the conceptions surrounding technology, the broad concepts. Do we need to be steeped in coding? We have a coding for lawyers class. We don't give credit for it, but in part it's an effort to demystify a lot of the jargon so that we know how to interact with technology and with technologists. So through our legal hacker stuff we've been doing at Brooklyn Law and elsewhere, we have done some rapid prototyping to prove out that you can use rudimentary technology tools, free open source technology tools, to do something, to create a revenge porn takedown app, or to create a tool to allow felons returning to society to get whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But we've done it in sort of bad way, bad legal design, bad technology, off-the-shelf open source stuff. It was good experience, but it wasn't really for the regular law student. It was for my most sophisticated law students. Now, I got to tell you, there's been a revolution in the legal automation tools out there over the past 5 or 10 years. And when I first started teaching, almost all of my students had, first of all, they were almost all male, but they all had undergraduate degrees in some sort of engineering, computer science or something. Now, I would say 70, 80% of my students have degrees in the humanities or the social sciences, and upwards of 50, 60% are female. So that shows a marked transformation. Part of that is, I think, a recognition among burgeoning lawyers that they at least need to know some of this. If they're going to represent new economy companies and participate in policy shaping for the digital world, they need to at least know some of it. Also, though, I think the tools are getting easier and easier. So we used to use horrible, complex tools, way too sophisticated for me to use because I'm not, by nature, a technologist or by training. Now there's things like Community Lawyer, DocAssemble, Neotologic, a lot of the ones that you showed in your chart earlier. These tools are getting more and more idiot-proof. I think it's just a matter of a couple years before the operating systems, the user interfaces, are going to be usable by lawyers without much, certainly with no coding experience. But these non-code, comfortable user interfaces, which opens up the door to what Professor Kowalski was talking about, lawyer as programmer, essentially. If we don't need to know the underlying code, what are we going to need to know? We're going to need to know the law. You're going to need smart people steeped in the law to actually put in the law and the legal reasoning into those programs, those nice user interfaces. So it will be less need on building those back-end technologies and more the lawyer inputting the right analysis of the law. So that's where we're at right now. We are building, at Brooklyn Law School, and other schools are doing this too, we're building a justice lab right now. We've been trying for years, but it was always too difficult because of technology. Now, it's become pretty easy to now use these tools to automate legal process. And now our first level of support is for nonprofits and governments that can't service all of the potential constituencies that want them. So can we build some automation tools that will spit out documents for them, or at least direct them, chatbots, or different Q&As that will give them redress, either, if not resolve issues, at least spit out letters to tell them what to do and where to go, or file a form with a government entity. That's the revolution I think we're undergoing right now. And that's where I think this, our global connection is essential. Maybe 6 years ago, there was a young lawyer coder in Illinois who built an expungement app. All right, you become a majority age, you want to get rid of your criminal record. And most people don't do that. Hell, I had a criminal record before I was 18. I never expunged it. And I'm a lawyer. But there are kids out there who have the right to expunge their record and never take advantage of it because they didn't know the process.
To delete it.
Yeah, to delete your criminal record so that it doesn't haunt you for the rest of your life. So this person in Illinois wrote some code and put it up on GitHub. Put all the code on GitHub. So now there's this code on GitHub that we decided we can take to other states. We can take the code and we can apply New York-specific law to make it viable. So that's what I hope we ultimately create, is this repository of code that can be portable so that we can understand jurisdictional distinctions. So that what we're doing in Brooklyn can inform what you're doing in Vienna, can inform what they're doing in London, et cetera, around the world. And then can we just reiterate and build on top of that and create this deep repository of tools that will help across the globe.
So, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years down the road, is legal tech, driving the lawyer into a particular corner of practice, like you say, only the high end, or is it, or will it take longer, or are there other, what are the developments you foresee if you, with your experience, look beyond the sort of immediate future? Okay,
so we're seeing this big dilemma now. Yes, you're right that the legal tasks are going to be very sophisticated legal tasks that the legal automators can't do. The real problem we have is, how do you get from law school graduation to law firm partner? What goes on? So we got to think about where was the training post-law school? Post-law school, you were doing those routine tasks while the partner was doing the sophisticated tasks. Now, if the law firms don't need the junior lawyers to do those routine tasks, how are we training the partners of tomorrow? It's not a matter of how do we train the first-year associates of tomorrow, because the computer is the first-year associate of tomorrow. So that is the dilemma that I think the law firms, the legal community, legal academia are confronted with right now. I think there's going to be some changes and experimentations in training post-law school graduation.
Will you do that at university?
So some
Will you
of
do
it,
it at university is the question.
So a lot of it has to be done at university, but a lot of it might be done in partnership with the private and public bar. So imagine a scenario where, do they have apprenticeship models in Europe? I think we're going to see some blending of apprenticeship models where the law firms recognize we need to train partners, but we don't want to pay full freight for their 7 years as an associate. Can we partner with the law school so there's post-law school education going on where we won't bear the full freight of training them to become partners over the next 7 years? So I don't know how that plays out ultimately, but there will be some combination of law school training, law firm training, collaborative training. Everyone, we're all talking about these graduate-level LLM programs that will give legal technology certificates. Is that enough? I don't know how you train. I don't know that I see the clear model.
Is there room for a new type of lawyer that is more focused on the process, legal tech type of thing, and has an education that is, let's say, legal informatics, a mixture of informatics and legal studies? We know something here. We have something here like called business informatics. So you have a mixture of business and informatics education.
So at least in the near term, for the next 5 or 10 years, I think that is a major growth area. I think the law schools have recognized we've got to train lawyers to be not necessarily traditional lawyers, but to be legal technologists. The law firms weren't buying it, though I think the law firms should have been buying it. I think the law firms are now starting to recognize that the law firms that do buy that service are going to be leagues ahead of the law firms that don't. That's where the divide is going. We'll see winners and losers among the law firms that create more significant CIO positions and departments within the law firms themselves. Or there will be some outsourcing. We're now seeing, a lot of the companies that you mentioned that I saw on your list that are getting all the big money, iManage, Kiera Systems. These are companies that the law firms are now buying into to outsource those services. Now, I see. Now, and you've also got disruption, at least outside of America, I think in Europe, in the UK specifically, a lot of the Commonwealth countries, disruption by traditional compliance and accounting ventures. Deloitte, KPMG, Ernst & Young are all now trying to do legal services at a fraction of the price with those trained in law and those trained in technology. That's where the scary disruption is going to be. And we're going to see battles. Those are going to be political battles. In America, maybe more profound than in Europe, where the U.S. bar is going to be scared to death about losing their gravy train. Yeah? Okay.
But, I personally would foresee that the compliance officer of the future needs to have a legal technical education, because otherwise it is so hard to follow what happens in the systems if you're not up to it, and you need the legal background to know where the system's allowed to go or not, right? Yeah. So, I would see a lot of room for this mixture.
Yeah, but that was historically considered a less lucrative, less desirable job for lawyers. In fact, the U.S. News and World Report, which rates law schools, gives, I think, less credit if your graduates go to Deloitte than if they go to Cravath.
Yeah, sure.
Right? I think that's a mistake. We've got to train those rating organizations, I think, to recognize that there is serious value for students coming out of law school that have those specific skills. More and more of my students are going to places like Deloitte and Ernst & Young because of that, because they've got the blend of legal skills, compliance understanding, privacy law in particular, cybersecurity law, and some technological facility.
Interesting development. So, but Jonathan, sort of coming to an end on our timeline, what do you do if you're not in the law and legal hacking and things like that?
Well, so for better or worse, I live in America. We are, I think, living in political and social turmoil right now. So for me, every free moment, I try to devote to improve political process, at least in America, to ensure the rule of law can survive a Trump presidency. I think the younger generation made very clear on Friday that there is probably no more important issue than the survival of the planet, and at least the survival of humanity on the planet. So my hope is that we can use me, you, everyone in this room, to the extent we can collaborate, we can figure out how to harness our legal intelligence to ensure environmental, economic, and social justice around the world.
So a lot of social engagement.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. If we don't solve the environmental crisis, we'll solve nothing.
And where would you see in terms of your university career the next big project? Like you've done the clinic, you've done the legal hackers. Is there any?
Yeah, I know exactly what I want to do. Yeah, and I got to tell you, I'm sort of an outlier, pariah among my colleagues to some extent. A lot of the good stuff I do, I have tried to do off campus. Because I come from a standalone law school, but it's still a bureaucratic juggernaut, as someone said before. It is tough to maneuver that ship, even as flat a structure as I've got. So what I'm building right now, this Justice Lab, I want to make that global. I want to integrate that into legal hackers. I want to integrate that into other universities around the world. I think everything that we are all doing around the world to use these tech tools to improve access to justice in every realm has to be replicated around the world, and we should be sharing resources. So, which is why when you invited me here, I said, how can I turn this down? This is essential to build those bridges across the globe. It irritates me to no end when we have a legal hackathon and it lasts a weekend and it dies. Cool stuff was talked about and it just dies in the room. Unless they can become reiterative and virtual and ongoing, and I can learn from you, and you can learn from me, and we can learn from everyone else, and use our tools to build something that will last and even tools we've built. The law changes. Who's going to change the tool to keep up with the law? We need sort of a machine shop to make sure everything is in working order. So if we can create this sort of global justice lab network, I think we're going a long way. The fact that we've got legal...
project.
Yeah, and through, and there's any number of organizations. The big problem is, a lot of people want to own their turf. Be it in academia, there's commercial enterprises that are trying to control a lot of this. To the extent we can open source most of this and make sure that it's free and usable and reusable and reiterable, that's the only way I think we're ultimately going to survive. The problem is we've got to also make sure that lawyers, law students, graduates can actually survive. And again, I'll sort of reiterate, we are going through a monumental revolution. Some people say we have too many lawyers. I say we don't have nearly enough lawyers. We just need to figure out how to harness them better and how to ensure they are viable and sustainable economically.
Now, one final question. When you sort of use technology tools in teaching, like coding for lawyers or similar things, do you try it out personally?
So I am more of a... Yes, I don't do all the teaching when it comes to learning the technology, but I am an avid student. I sit right there with the students. I painstakingly try to learn how to use the new tools. If I can do it, I know my students can do it.
Okay, would you advise students here to try out those technologies?
So the tools, yeah, there's a couple tools in particular I would recommend. First of all, I always try to tell my students not to, we get free access to all of we got LexisNexis as a sponsor. Forget what I said. No, here, LexisNexis is free, Westlaw is free, Bloomberg's free, Practical Law is free. These are all, at least for law students. I try to discourage my students from using many of those tools because it really is a lot of hand-holding that they don't need. My first goal is to ask them to try to go out there and use their own devices to find the tools that they can use. Are there free open source tools? Because you don't know when you graduate what you're going to be allowed to use. And you're not going to have that much hand-holding. And the tools are going to change from year to year. Right now, I would say you try every tool you can get, but especially try the free mutable tools. There's a new tool called DocAssemble. And we helped start a company called community.lawyer. It's built on DocAssemble. As long as you're using it for free social justice kind of applications, it's free for you to use. The tool is becoming almost idiot-proof. We use another tool called Neotologic. Neotologic is more proprietary, but it's got more bells and whistles to it. I would fiddle with those, Neotologic, Community Lawyer, DocAssemble, and to the extent that, yes, LexisNexis, Westlaw, Bloomberg, Practical Law are experimenting with new capabilities, use them in law school while you can and figure out what the best of breed is right now. And I got to say, there's been a revolution in that space. Those tools are, and I give up on one, and a couple years later they'll say, oh, can you try it again? And they are always leagues ahead of where they were a couple years before. So I don't know which is the best of breed right now because they all are just monumentally better year after year.
So keep learning.
Keep learning. Don't expect what you're using today is going to be what you're going to be using in 5 years. We can't become captive to all that.
I think that's the downside of technology generally. Yeah. It evolves.
Yeah.
So, any particular question?
I think we should think of education as teaching transferable skills. So if you learn law, then you should think of law not as a specialized discipline, but as a transferable skill. After all, the companies in the U.S. are run by lawyers, aren't they? In Britain, they're run by accountants, and in the continent, they're run by engineers. So lawyers do have transferable skills. They become politicians. So it's not the end of the line. Right. If law, legal training should be training for transferable skills.
Yes, we are training thinkers, agile thinkers. That's our objective. God knows, and it used to, when I graduated from law school, me and all of my colleagues could have gone to a law firm and spent the next 60 years of our lives in the bosom of that law firm. That is not the world our students are graduating into. They're graduating into a world in which they've got to be agile and mutable and surf the changes. So yes, if they can become smart legal reasoners, they are always going to figure out a way to find their place in the evolving system. The problem is when you become too narrow in your focus, you just become, a litigator or a tax lawyer or, a securities lawyer. You're going to need ongoing legal education. And how is that legal education going to come? How are you going to learn to morph yourself? You've got to become a self-marketer, a self-educator, if you want to survive for the eternity of your career. But I think lawyers are going to be more adept at that than almost any other service sector.
Any more questions?
Yeah. So you've got all these technically trained lawyers coming out of your law school, and you release them into the wild. And at least over here in Austria, you're then often faced with law firms where the partners are very close to retirement, don't care very much about what 5-10 years ahead of is going to look like, and give you a big pile of files, paper, of course, and expect you to live with that. So there's all this knowledge that, okay, this doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be that hard. What would you advise them? How do you, how do you go out and tell your students? Do you tell them to suck it up?
So here, I tell them a couple. First of all, I say, go to firms that are more open-minded. And there are more and more of them. It might not be in my universe, the Wall Street firms anymore, the white shoe firms that are all still clinging to their traditional processes. Yeah. Yes, yeah. But, so this is a generational shift. Will it take 5 or 30 years for a generational shift to come? At some point, the students coming out of law school are going to be the partners. And they will be more open-minded. And we will see at some point, we will have reached the sort of the inflection point where those who believe in the value of new technologies will be the leaders of the new society. And I don't know when that happens. And you're right, there is this sort of bumpy, frictionful period right now where there's a disconnect between those who want to deploy new technologies. It's easy to start something with new technology. It's very hard to change something that already exists to use new technology. We're forced by nature of progress and evolution to build on top of what existed before. You look at the telephone network. The telephone network is built on copper wires and 10-digit numbers. Is that the world we would have created? No, we would have built a world on fiber and infinites of IPv6 or something. But we're stuck with adapting to what we got. So it's going to be a slow process to move the big law firms. And the small law firms that try, some will fail and some will succeed. And the ones that succeed will, we'll see, survival of the fittest, destruction.
I just feel like you're losing a lot of talent at the moment to in-house, to alternate works.
Right, Deloitte.
I don't want to live like that. I don't want to work like that. Mm-hmm. If I go in-house in an IT company, I work wherever I want, 40 hours, not 60 plus with paper. And this is really a very big friction point at the moment, I find.
Well, so maybe that answers Stefan's question. So maybe the new middle ground training point isn't the law firms. Maybe the new middle ground training point is in-house. Now, it used to be the other way around. You go to a law firm, then you go in-house. But maybe because the legal skills required to be in-house are not the most sophisticated legal skills required of the most sophisticated partners at the most sophisticated law firms. Maybe the law firms will start poaching from in-house those lawyers who have hired them and done the routine work, but hired the seasoned partners for the more sophisticated work.
Yes, but in my own experience, they then are really, really shocked by the weird, fuzzy ideas I come with.
They're shocked by what?
With the weird ideas that I come up with, mobile working and stuff.
Well, yeah.
Okay, we need, unfortunately, to close now, because otherwise we won't make it, I guess, in time to the mayor's reception. And I already have been called by the mayor's office whether or not we would be in time. So I would conclude the day here. I need a big applause for Jonathan from you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Any final message to the audience?
I would say, how much does it cost to join Vienna Legal Hackers?
Nothing.
What?
For free.
Free. Freemium.
Completely free.
I would say join your Legal Hackers chapter. The best thing about Legal Hackers for me is the global network, the sharing of ideas with people completely outside your sandbox, and a travel vehicle. Wherever I go in the world, I figure out who's running the Legal Hackers chapter in that region, and all of a sudden I got immediate connections on the ground to share ideas and meet with interesting people.
As in particular, if you're interested in legal technology and the law and that borderline, then it's a good idea. It's 40,000 plus members globally. Yeah. Thank you very much. You have been a great audience. I hope to see you at the reception.